Nights like these never ended well. I sat alone at Sullivan's, the kind of bar where secrets were whispered over half-empty glasses and regrets drowned beneath dim lighting. A place for men who had seen too much, lost too much, or both. Tonight, I wasn't just another customer. I was a man on the brink of discovering the truth I had been avoiding for far too long. The bartender, an old man with tired eyes, poured my usual bourbon without asking. I nodded in thanks, gripping the glass tightly as I stared at my reflection in the mirror behind the counter. Dark circles under my eyes, the weight of exhaustion pressing on my shoulders. That's when the doors swung open. I didn't turn at first. The bar was always busy at this hour, filled with strangers seeking company or solitude. But then I heard it, her laughter. Soft, familiar, and laced with the kind of happiness she hadn't shown in years. My grip on the glass tightened. Claire. She walked in, radiant under the amber glow of the overhead lights. My wife, the woman I had vowed to love, cherish, and protect. But she wasn't alone. A man trailed beside her, tall and confident, his hand resting casually on the small of her back as if he had every right to touch her. I inhaled sharply. They didn't see me yet. Claire was too caught up in him, in the way he spoke, the way he leaned closer as if the world around them didn't exist. I could barely process what I was witnessing. My wife, my Claire, slipping into a booth just a few feet away, completely unaware that her secret had been shattered in an instant. My stomach churned, a mix of rage, betrayal, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. I had suspected for months. The late nights, the sudden disinterest, the way she looked at her phone with a ghost of a smile she never shared with me. But seeing it with my own eyes? It felt like a blade to the ribs. I forced myself to breathe. My fingers twitched with the urge to slam my glass down, to march over and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I observed. The stranger, her lover, spoke with an easy confidence. Claire laughed, tilting her head back, exposing her neck, the same way she used to when we first met. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body refused to move. What was I supposed to do? Yell? Cause a scene? That would make me the villain, wouldn't it? And Claire, she would find a way to twist this, to justify her actions, to paint me as the reason she had sought comfort in another man's arms. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat, lifting my glass to my lip. If she thought I was weak, she was wrong. The bartender must have sensed the tension rolling off me in waves because he leaned in slightly. You all right? I forced a smirk. Not yet. My mind raced, replaying every moment that led to this. The way she had kissed me absent-mindedly before leaving the house tonight, saying she was meeting friends. The way she had dismissed me so easily, as if I were nothing more than an afterthought. Now, she sat across from a man who wasn't me, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as she hung on to his every word. I wanted to break him. I wanted to break her. But most of all, I wanted to know how long this had been going on. Lifting my phone, I scrolled through our messages. Claire, don't wait up, it'll be a late night. My jaw clenched. Liar. The man leaned in, whispering something against her ear. Her lips curled into a knowing smile. My blood boiled. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my loyalty. And this was how she repaid me? I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for impulsiveness. If Claire wanted to play games, then fine. I'd play too. For now, I'd watch. I'd listen. And when the moment was right, I'd make sure she never forgot the night she walked into this bar. You said. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, the ice clinking softly against the side. My heartbeat was steady now, controlled, but my mind was a storm, spinning with questions I didn't want answers to. Claire leaned into him, her delicate fingers brushing over his wrist as she laughed. I had almost forgotten what that sound was like when it wasn't weighed down by forced affection. How long had she been seeing him? How many nights had she claimed to be working late while wrapped in another man's arms? I took a slow sip of my drink, watching without truly seeing. The way she looked at him, it was different. It was the kind of gaze a woman gave when she was enthralled, when she felt something deep, something real. It was the look she used to give me. It wasn't just lust. It was worse. She cared about him. The realization hit harder than a punch to the gut. I had braced for an affair, for a night of meaningless passion she would later regret. But this? This was deliberate. This was a connection. A bitter chuckle escaped me. How pathetic I must have looked, sitting here alone, watching my wife fawn over another man while I drowned in bourbon and misplaced hope. I needed to act, but how? I had always imagined cheating in black and white. If someone betrayed me, I would leave. No hesitation, no second chances. But when the moment actually arrived, it wasn't that simple. Years of love, of memories, of shared dreams, they didn't just vanish. Did I still love her? That was the most painful part. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to feel nothing but fury. But as I sat there, observing the woman who had once been my world, I felt something worse than anger. I felt loss. The bartender passed by again, his gaze flickering toward Claire and her companion before settling back on me. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he understood what I was going through. "Another?" he asked, nodding toward my half-empty glass. I hesitated before shaking my head. "Not yet." For a few more minutes, I did nothing but watch. Claire's fingers ghosted over the man's forearm, and he responded in kind, running his knuckles down her cheek, a gesture far too intimate for someone who wasn't her husband. My stomach twisted, the heat of betrayal searing through me like wildfire. I had been a fool. I was still sitting in that misery when someone slid onto the stool beside me. "You look like a man in need of a distraction." The voice was smooth, confident, feminine. I turned, meeting the gaze of a woman who didn't belong in a place like this. She was striking. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, lips painted a shade of red that matched the fire burning in my chest. She held a glass of wine, swirling it lazily as if she had all the time in the world. I blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Excuse me." She smirked, tilting her head slightly. "I saw you watching them. Your wife, I'm guessing." I stiffened. "How do you?" She laughed softly, sipping her drink. "Men only look that devastated when the woman they love betrays them." I exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around my glass. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "Only to someone who knows the feeling." Something in her tone made me pause. There was history there, a story she wasn't telling. I studied her for a moment. She was composed, confident, but there was something guarded in her expression, something familiar. "What's your name?" I asked. She swirled her wine again, as if contemplating whether or not she should answer. "Vivian." "Vivian," I repeated, letting the name settle on my tongue. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You could confront her, you know. Call her out right here, make a scene." I glanced back at Claire, watching as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, smiling at the man across from her as if he were the only person in the world. "No," I murmured. "That's what she'd expect." Vivian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "So what's your move?" I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. Claire had chosen to humiliate me in public, believing I would never know. But now the power was shifting. I had the chance to turn the tables, to make her feel the sting of betrayal. Vivian studied me for a moment before smirking. "You know, I could help with that." I arched a brow. "And why would you want to?" She shrugged, tapping her nails against her glass. "Maybe I enjoy watching karma in action." Her offer lingered in the air between us, tempting, dangerous. I turned back toward Claire, watching the way she leaned into her lover, completely oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. Two could play this game. I looked back at Vivian, a slow, deliberate smile forming. "Tell me more." Vivian smirked, swirling her wine lazily, amusement flickering in her dark eyes. "Tell me, do you want revenge, or do you want to wake her up?" I studied her, weighing the question carefully. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to hurt Claire, to see the shock on her face when she realized she wasn't the only one capable of deception. But another part of me, the weaker, more pathetic side, wanted her to regret this, to remember what we had and realize what she was about to throw away. Either way, Vivian was offering me something dangerous, something intoxicating. "What do you have in mind?" I asked, my voice lower now, more controlled. She leaned in slightly, her perfume a mixture of vanilla and something darker, something thrilling. "You could sit here all night, drinking yourself into oblivion, hoping she comes to her senses. Or," she tilted her head toward Claire's table, where my wife was still laughing, still touching him. "You could show her exactly what she's risking." I inhaled sharply, my pulse hammering. The idea was reckless, fueled by emotion rather than logic. But hell, I had already lost her, hadn't I? "What do you propose?" I asked, meeting Vivian's gaze. She grinned, a wicked glint in her eyes. "Let's give her a taste of her own medicine." I hesitated, glancing toward Claire. Did she even deserve my hesitation? The answer came when her lover leaned in, whispering something against her ear that made her blush. My grip tightened around my glass. "All right," I murmured. "I'm in." Vivian's smile deepened. She reached out, placing a cool hand over mine. "Then follow my lead." She turned on her stool, angling herself toward me so that our bodies were close, almost too close. The heat of her presence sent a rush of adrenaline through me, waking something primal, something reckless. I could feel Claire's table in my peripheral vision, but I forced myself to focus on Vivian. She lifted her wine glass, her voice light and teasing. "Tell me something," she mused, tapping the rim against mine. "How long has she been cheating?" I swallowed hard. "Not sure. I suspected for a while." She nodded, taking a slow sip of her drink. "And you still love her?" I exhaled sharply. "I don't know anymore." Vivian studied me, her gaze unreadable. Then, before I could process it, she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "She's watching us." My heart kicked against my ribs. I resisted the urge to turn, to confirm what I already knew. Claire had noticed. Vivian pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, her lips curved in a knowing smile. Now what? I knew what she was doing, giving me an out, a chance to stop this before it went too far. But I had made my choice. Claire had already made hers. I lifted my hand, fingers brushing against Vivian's bare shoulder. It was calculated, deliberate. The kind of touch that sent a message. Claire wasn't the only one who could move on. Vivian's breath hitched just slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her chin up, her lips inches from mine. "Good," she whispered. "Now let's make her squirm." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Vivian laughed, her fingers grazing over my arm, her body pressing subtly against mine as if we were sharing a secret. Every touch, every glance was intentional, and I felt it, Claire's eyes on me. Then it happened. A sharp inhale from across the room. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I turned just in time to see Claire rising from her seat, her expression tight, controlled, but her eyes? Furious. Her lover blinked in confusion, clearly unaware of what had changed. Claire barely acknowledged him, her gaze locked onto me. Vivian smirked, leaning back slightly. "Here we go." Claire strode toward us, her movements tense. She stopped just short of our table, folding her arms. "You're here," she said, her voice neutral, but I could hear the storm beneath it. I raised an eyebrow, feigning casual indifference. "Yeah. And?" Her gaze flickered to Vivian, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I didn't know you came to this bar." I shrugged, taking a slow sip of my drink. "Didn't think I needed your permission." A muscle in her jaw ticked. "Who's your friend?" Vivian leaned forward, offering Claire an easy, confident smile. "Vivian." She extended her hand. "You must be Claire." Claire hesitated, just a second too long, before shaking it, her grip a little too firm. "Nice to meet you." Vivian's smirk never wavered. "Likewise." Claire turned back to me, her eyes sharp now. So this is what you're doing? I tilted my head. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Her nostrils flared, but she quickly masked it with a cool expression. I came here with a friend. I leaned back in my seat. Is that what you're calling him? Her fingers twitched at her sides, but she didn't break. You're being ridiculous. I chuckled, shaking my head. Am I? Vivian placed a hand on my thigh, not too intimate, just enough to make Claire notice. For what it's worth, she said smoothly, he's great company. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, I hope you enjoy it. She turned sharply, striding back toward her table. Vivian exhaled, taking another sip of her wine. Well, that was fun. I watched Claire as she sat back down, her movements stiff, her focus no longer on her lover but somewhere distant. Good. She was rattled. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. You said. I watched Claire from across the room, her rigid posture betraying the cool mask she tried to maintain. Her lover spoke to her, but she wasn't really listening. Her eyes kept flickering toward me and Vivian. The tables had turned. The woman who thought she could walk all over me, who believed I would never know, never act, was now sitting in silence, seething, trying to process what was happening. But I wasn't finished. Vivian swirled her wine, watching Claire with quiet amusement. She's unraveling. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders back. Not enough. Vivian smirked, tilting her head. What's the endgame here, darling? You want her to suffer? You want her back? I stared at Claire, letting the question settle in my mind. Did I want her back? After all the lies, all the betrayal? No. The woman I had loved no longer existed. But I wanted her to feel it. The sting. The regret. Follow my lead, I murmured, setting my glass down. Vivian arched a brow but didn't protest as I took her hand, leading her toward the dance floor. Claire's gaze snapped to us immediately. The music thrummed through the room, a slow, sensual beat. I pulled Vivian close, my fingers brushing against the bare skin of her back. She let out a small chuckle, amused but willing. She's fuming, Vivian whispered against my ear. Good. Claire had done this to me. She had chosen another man, betrayed the vows we had made, treated me like an afterthought. Now, she was watching me do the same, only I wasn't hiding. I wanted her to see. Vivian moved smoothly, her body pressing into mine in a way that should have felt wrong, but it didn't. It felt like power, like taking control back. Claire's lover finally noticed something was wrong. He leaned in, whispering something to her. She waved him off, her eyes fixed on me, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might snap. Then, she made her move. She stood abruptly, storming across the room. The moment she reached us, she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my wrist. Enough, she hissed. I turned, my face unreadable. Excuse me. Her eyes were wild now, all pretenses of indifference gone. What are you doing? Vivian, ever composed, stepped slightly closer, draping an arm around my shoulder. Dancing, she answered with a smirk. You should try it sometime. Loosens you up. Claire shot her a glare before focusing back on me. Can we talk? I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. Why? Something wrong. Her breath hitched. You know what? I took my time, pretending to think. Oh, you mean the way I'm dancing with someone else? I leaned in slightly, my voice low and mocking. How does that feel, Claire? She flinched, her throat working as she swallowed hard. Vivian took a sip from her glass, completely unbothered. You should really be careful, sweetheart. Cheaters don't usually get the luxury of jealousy. Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. She wasn't used to being on this side of things. She expected me to be weak, to break, to beg. Instead, I was standing here, letting her feel every ounce of the betrayal she had given me. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You don't understand. I laughed. No, Claire, you don't. Her fingers curled into fists. I made a mistake. I arched a brow. Which one? Lying to me? Sneaking around? Bringing him here like I was too stupid to notice? She flinched again, her mask cracking. I didn't mean for it to. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I don't care. She sucked in a sharp breath. And there it was. The moment she realized she had lost me. She had expected rage, an argument, a fight that might have led to forgiveness. But I wasn't giving her that. I was giving her nothing. I want to fix this, she said, her voice softer now, desperate. We can fix this. Vivian chuckled beside me, shaking her head. Oh, honey. You don't get to decide that anymore. Claire turned to me, eyes searching mine. Please. I let the silence stretch between us, let her drown in it. Then, with the same calmness she had used to betray me, I uttered the words that sealed her fate. We're done. Claire inhaled sharply, her eyes glistening. But she knew. She had played her game. And she had lost. Vivian smiled, looping her arm through mine as we turned away. Claire stood there, frozen, watching as I walked out of her life, the same way she had walked out of mine.